You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. You get to listen to it twice because I hit the wrong button. Here we go. You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners. So, let's be friends. It's time to dive into our July mailbag. So, we always ask for feedback from you guys, feedback at missedapex.net. That comes through to me and Matt, and we've collected enough of your interesting questions or comments to try and dive into and learn more about the world of Formula One. Now, don't worry, I have an expert guest on with me this week, but I just wanted to read two short emails. Well, one of them's very long, but I'm only going to read a little bit of it. So we had a nice one from Andre saying, I've just finished listening to the Top Trumps episode, and I just had to let you know how much I enjoyed it. Good vibes all around. You guys were clearly having a ball. I love the stories and memories you had of various F1 drivers and misadventures. Would be fun to have more. Well, I'm glad you've said that because we really did enjoy that. Top Trumps is a fantastic game, and we are definitely going to do some more Top Trumps. And Top Trumps like the episode as well, so they're going to team up with us to do some giveaways, so some Top Trumps merch, and we're going to get our hold of more Top Trumps packs. So we did the Silverstone Legends one, but there are others as well. That's not a paid promotion, but it is pretty cool because Top Trumps was a bit of a childhood favourite. Now, I got a really, really long email from Adriana, and I will just say walls of text make me kind of go blurry-eyed. So keep it to a paragraph, and I'll always be more responsive. But Adriana says, I love the outstanding energy that you bring to your vocal inflection that always matches the excitement. And I love the knowledge, energy, and diverse perspectives of your panel. So thank you very much for that. We do read the negative feedback, kind of, but nice feedback is nice. So we're going to get on to your questions and comments with a special guest. I'm joined in the shed by F1 YouTube sensation, and I'm not exaggerating, it's Tommo F1. Hello, Tommo.
Hello, Spanners. You know what? The dulcet tones of that Missed Apex podcast. I love it. I love it. And in the flesh, it's just something else. It's a pleasure.
Well, I feel guilty now because the intro is pre-recorded, and I do add some EQ in there. I'm not naturally like Morgan Freeman. Now it's all smoke and mirrors. No, I'm just a normal Essex lad like you. But I think you might be, one of the very top F1 YouTubers.
Do you reckon? Well, what are we measuring that by? Because in terms of people agreeing with me, I think I'm kind of quite low on the list. It seems at times, but then I engage with Twitter too much. So there you go. That's what I get for that.
I definitely engage on Twitter too much as well. But the problem we have on Missed Apex Podcast is we are always arguing and debating amongst ourselves. Mm-hmm. So if all the opinions are covered across a topic, we do end up definitely upsetting someone. So we always get, how could you idiots say that X person should have won? I say, well, we did literally have another person say X definitely shouldn't have won. But, I think people latch on to the ones they disagree with the most.
Yes, I think, when I do my live streams, I have my live chat. It's just me in this room chatting to a camera, essentially. So I try and make it as back and forth as possible, try and understand people's, takes and opinions and the nuances to the conversation. But at the end of the day, like, you've just got to say what you feel, ain't you, Spanners? You got to be your own best version. Because the amount of times I'll get like the same video, you'd be like, oh, Tommo's biased against Verstappen, actually British biased against Verstappen, and the same person, and one comment later will be like, oh, this Verstappen lover, he loves him, he hates all the British drivers. I'm like, which one is it?
So
same video.
What I get is Norris. So I definitely get British bias. You're massively in favour of Norris. He can do no wrong. If Leclerc did that, you wouldn't bat an eyelid. But I also get God, you're so seething and dripping with hate for Lando Norris. It's unbelievable. I can never watch again. And I do, like, you know, occasionally I'll listen back to an old show and I'll listen to my opinions and go, oh, I don't think that anymore. Or I disagree with myself. And so I kind of go, if anyone ever emails me and goes, oh yeah, a year ago you said such and such a thing. I went, yeah, that's because I thought that and I'm working through those thoughts.
Dripping with hate is a good one. I like
dripping. Look at the hate dripping from you and your British bias. That's what we get.
It's fantastic, isn't it? I mean, you know what as well? I love like having debates, and I love trying to understand someone else's point of view. And like I feel like just a lot of people just can't handle seeing an opinion that isn't their own, and it has to be like malicious bias. It has to be like some kind of, you know, it's something against their driver. Some kind of
Sometimes we're just being
disingenuous.
Sometimes we're just stupid and we don't know better. But a lot of the time, the panel will start off with the premise that I initially agreed with, and I still find myself going, "Oh yeah," and like I genuinely argue against the opinion that I originally had, and you get lost in that. And I think that is just the fun of that content, is working through these arguments. And my brother-in-law said, "Yeah, I like listening to Missed Apex, but at the end of it, he goes, I don't think I've learned anything, because you all said different things." I go, yep, that's a feature,
but
not
that's
a bug.
the conversation in a pub, isn't it? Which I think that I've always tried to, that's how I like to talk about the sport. And that's exactly how I think you guys talk about the sport. It's a bunch of different opinions. Everyone's got their own perspective on it. And that's the beauty. That's why we have platforms. That's why people are interested in listening to a bunch of strangers on the internet talk about the sport, because we like to hear this diversity of opinion and be challenged on what we think about the sport.
Absolutely no one has ever emailed or commented to say, I listen to Missed Apex podcast because that Spanners fellow is right about everything and he's my oracle for information. His thoughts have become my thoughts.
And look, if people thought that, Spanners, you would be heading up a cult.
That's a great idea. So first, answer the listener questions from the mailbag, then start an F1 cult. Okay, good.
Yeah.
At least we've got a plan. All right, let's start with Matthew Brittle from our Patreon Discord. You can join that by going to patreon.com/Missed Apex. Support Spanners, not Tommo. Tommo's doing fine. This is a great initial question, actually, which is, in fact, I beg your pardon. So this is actually Patrick first. So will Red Bull win more races this season? Was letting Newey go a good idea? And Matthew's question is, what I think is interesting is at the beginning of the season when Red Bull showed the new car and the radical changes, Newey was quoted as saying he didn't think it was enough of a change. And I think it's interesting that that is actually coming to fruition and no one is talking about it. Red Bull have had a couple of non-optimal races and people are calling it. They're saying, yep, pull the plug. That's beeping. Take them off life support. It's over. Is it over?
Over. Oh, it's a very finite, very
run's over.
Definitive way of putting it. Look, I think the Newey benefit obviously paid dividends going into these new regulations from 21 into 22. And I think now that all the teams are getting on top of, you know, he did his thesis, didn't he, on ground effect Newey. So he's got this exceptional understanding of that fundamental aerodynamic concepts more than pretty much anyone in the world at that time. But now I think it is a bit of a different story, because all of these teams and all of their technical departments have, you know, converged to a point where, you know, Red Bull is not the quickest car. That Adrian Newey design, and how much is Adrian Newey and how much is Pierre Wacher and the rest of the technical team, we don't know. We know he's a consultant, but we don't know how involved he is. Like, I don't know if going into 26, these are still going to be ground effect cars. They're not going to fundamentally change in that instance. So I don't know, Spanners, how much that Adrian Newey benefit is going to carry on going forward versus the clear and obvious benefit that Red Bull had having him in their team in 2021. I don't necessarily think that's the case anymore. Surely all the other teams have worked out ground effect now just as much.
Yeah.
If not more. Like,
there's a couple of things out of that. So how much input has he actually put into it? Are these ground effect cars going forward? I think they have significantly reduced the effect, like from the floor and the diffuser, that you can actually have. So I think it is reduced ground effect. But also, have the teams managed to catch up and also be experts at ground effect? I think the Mercedes upgrade shows what's been going wrong for a lot of other teams. And in fact, the Mercedes upgrade and the Ferrari downgrade are actually related. So these teams are fantastic at getting in there and sorting out the aerodynamic side. And I'm sure all their wind tunnel data shows, yep, we added more points of downforce. The ground effect is working. But I think it might have come down to the suspension and being able to have a stable platform to make all of that work. So Mercedes, with their little bump on the nose, seem to have sorted something with their suspension, whereas Ferrari have started bouncing again. So I think that might have been just like the real key difference of once teams got on top of making sure, it wasn't bouncing, the core data that they had collected over the past few years, I don't think is wasted. So Mercedes are now saying, yeah, we can actually add things to the platform that work because we can now get it to be stable. Maybe for next year, they'll have one that doesn't have like a Frankenstein little bump on the end. But yeah, they have closed the gap, but it's amazing it's taken this long to essentially unlock all the good work they've been doing. But how much of that is down to Adrian Newey? If you speak to people in Red Bull or ex-Red Bull people, as I'm sure you have, you're a very well-connected young man. They do say you don't see Adrian Newey day to day on the shop floor. And so I was kind of having a bit of an argument with, it was Van Gien. I was going to say I won't name who I was having an argument with. But we've all spoken to Red Bull people who say, you don't see Newey. He's not there turning spanners or anything. But as a project lead and someone with all that knowledge, my suspicion is whoever gets him next is going to have this boatload of information. And Red Bull have to miss that. Like, I can't believe that all the teams are so stupid that they're basically breaking the bank bidding for Adrian Newey, and Red Bull is sitting there chuckling, going, oh no, it was just Dan Fallows and Pierre Vacher. They were the real ones doing it. Ha ha ha. We fooled them.
Well, I guess it's like law of diminishing returns. Again, the Newey, the value of Newey and the suspension understanding that he had going into 22 meant that Red Bull's path, you set a path, right? And if you're going on the wrong path, well, after a long period of time, you're going to find yourself way off where you actually want to be. And Red Bull set on that right path early doors. And you look at, McLaren when they changed up their car, and they were still towards the back at the start of 23, but they had confidence going into that season, even though they said at the start of 23, we're going to be slow at the start, and they really did back themselves because they really felt like they'd set it on the right on the right trajectory
this time.
And I think also, Spanners, I think one other differentiating factor is not just Newey, it's Verstappen. How much has Max made that car look more like, if Max is the best driver in F1 right now, which I believe he is, and I think he's been the best driver in F1 for the last 2-3 seasons, how much more dominant is he making that car look compared to the average driver that has this Red Bull, those 10 in a row, and then he got 9 in a row as well. Sorry, 11 in a row and then 9 in a row. Like, how much is he and Newey? Is Newey getting the head start, but also Max just being able to play with that car on the nose and get performance out of it that no other driver in the world could?
You've got to feel like it's both. And I bet Hamilton had that kind of effect, with Mercedes as well, where the team go, we know what that driver is capable of, therefore we can keep doing this. And if you didn't have that driver, maybe that upgrade wouldn't have worked. But because Max is there, you just keep unlocking, more and more levels. So I agree with you that Verstappen now, he's absolutely in his prime. I think it's almost indisputable that he's the best driver on the grid at the moment. But let's wait to see, because he's got the same disadvantage that Hamilton had in 2021. Whereas now he's the champion, he's had that dominant car, and then now he's suddenly having to go back wheel to wheel with a Lando Norris who's been in that carbon fiber zone for the whole of his career. And that's what Hamilton had in 2021, wasn't it? He kind of had an easy time in 19, in 20, and then Verstappen's coming in battle hardened. So I think it'll be really interesting now, because Verstappen, undoubtedly has been doing fantastic. And you don't know behind the scenes how much they're able to do because he's so good. But I think him being tested wheel to wheel again, that is going to be great fun. I really, really fear for Red Bull if they lose Verstappen. So if Verstappen somehow ends up going to Mercedes, I think they're in real trouble because they've built the car completely around him.
Well, they've they are literally completely reliant on this man because Checo's not a mug, yet he's been made to look like one.
I
Like
hate this. Yeah.
in his performances, he's not driving. And you look at his gap relative to Max across his whole time at Red Bull, and it's been huge. Not that much. Even in 21, it wasn't actually that much
I
better
know, it's gone.
than
People have forgotten how not that bad it was.
that's like it. His average qualifying position was like P6 point something in 2021. Like he was still qualifying. Alex was still qualifying. Gasly was not just getting beaten by Max, but they were getting beaten by lots of other drivers
Oh, yeah.
as well. It's not like just Max was dunking on them. So I just think that you look at how Piastri's been able to go in at McLaren and within a season and a bit almost catch up to Norris, and I feel like he's right there. George has been able to go into Mercedes. Yes, of course, he's test driven for Mercedes, but been able to go in alongside Lewis, and he's pretty much there. Science was able to go into Ferrari and get very, very close to Charles Leclerc. Like, but Red Bull don't seem to be able to facilitate that, and I don't think it's just because they're all driver bad, driver not as good as Max, Max great. Like, Red Bull have to take their share of the accountability for not being able to foster an environment that can, either they're making the wrong decisions. And this is what, all this talk about Red Bull should get Science or Red Bull should get Ricardo or Red Bull should get whoever. Like Checo had like an incredible 2020. He was one of the best drivers that season.
Good. Yeah.
Hulkenberg's having an incredible year there. If you chuck Hulkenberg in that Red Bull, what's saying the same thing doesn't happen? Like they need to be able to get a driver that can drive a car like Max can, and getting a Hulkenberg who's been in the sport for years and has got a really learned way of driving, just like Checo had a really learned way of driving, didn't work. But then Gasly and Albon, who were really young and really pretty green when they jumped in, they also didn't work. So
the gap is too big. It's unnaturally large, isn't it? There's something's going on. I think it speaks to what we were talking about earlier, which is basically Red Bull and Verstappen engineering in tandem. And they've got to a place where that is undrivable for any other combination. So that Red Bull might not have become or had those driving characteristics if they had been with any other lead driver. So if Hamilton had been their lead driver or Norris particularly, they might have developed in a much more conventional way. I'm not saying whether that would have been slower, faster, whatever, but they have. That's my suspicion. They've clearly developed towards Max. Something has to be happening that has made Perez look like such a mug, and Albon as well. Do you remember when Albon was there? You had George Russell angry at Red Bull saying, like, what have they done? Because I know he's not that. I know he's not like that. I know he's not slow.
Yeah.
And now everybody thinks, he's fine. And he talked about, having that massively sensitive car to drive that is just completely matched to what Verstappen wants. So, I don't believe any driver you put in there is going to do any better. So I think at the moment, that's why I worry that if they lose, I'm not a fan, so I'm not like massively worried for them. I'm not losing sleep, but if they lose Verstappen, they have got a philosophy now which is undrivable, I think, for most drivers. And that's my enduring defense of Perez at the moment, because I'm just hating it. I'm a massive Perez fan, and I really just wish he'd left a couple of years ago, got sacked a couple of years ago and gone. And now when we talk about the replacement for Perez, because I do think it's going to be a replacement for Perez, I'm now looking at drivers I don't like to go there instead. So I'm hearing whispers about Tsunoda really being a genuine contender, and I'm going, no, go to Austin, run, escape from Red Bull.
I've seen, I think Jenson Button's been quoted a couple of times recently saying, when he was at McLaren alongside Lewis, they both have very, very different driving styles. Lewis is very binary with the throttle and the brake. He's on it and off it straight away, and he does all the control with his hands. Jenson's the opposite. He modulates the throttle, modulates the brake, and then very smooth with his steering inputs. Now, them two at McLaren as teammates were pretty similar, like in terms of points, in terms of performance during their time as McLaren teammates. McLaren were able to build a car and foster an environment. Yes, they weren't winning championships. Of course, Red Bull were doing that. But, you had two drivers with fundamentally opposed driving styles that were both able to, excel, I think, in that car. I mean, Jenson and Lewis are two of the most gifted
they were close
drivers that have come from the UK. Yeah, they were pretty close. So, Red Bull can't do that. That they've demonstrated, like you say, they've gone down this kind of alley, and now they're kind of stuck. And Max is, well, obviously
What?
Jos and Christian are having their little beast, and now Checo's getting into a position where, yeah, it is looking like he'll get dropped mid-season because Christian isn't defending Checo like he once
No,
was.
no, the opposite.
I'm not
really.
hearing those
Yeah,
quotes anymore.
Yeah, but they could have just got addicted to the success and the development and the progress they were making with Verstappen, and then you kind of see the other kids just out of arm's reach. But they're kind of floating, and they've got one floaty armband left. Yeah, the other one is floating away, but they'll be okay for a bit. And I think you get to a certain point where you go, yeah, we haven't gone down the development path that just allows drivers to get in and go. We've created this kind of beast, really. So Rob is talking about this, says there was a verbal slip up with Max at Goodwood, which implied Danny Rick might be his teammate. Do you think Red Bull are going to give Danny Rick a farewell tour second half of the season before he retires, with Lawson put in the VCARB, the Visa Cash App, and Checo put in the bin? Very harsh, Rob. I'm unhappy with you for saying that. Obviously, my personal thing is I think Yuki has done the most to deserve that second seat. So, do we think Checo is not long for this sport, and who are they putting in?
Okay, well, I think Checo, if he is dropped mid-season, I mean, he's said so many times he wants to finish his career at Red Bull. I don't see him, even though I think Williams would be interested in him. I think Alpine would be interested in him. I think Sauber, Audi would be interested in him because of, yes, obviously Red Bull, it's been a difficult few years, but like, I think in a different environment, we would see a much better version of Checo. And of course, the financial backing he brings, particularly, I think for Williams, that would be really helpful. I see him retiring if he is dropped mid-season. Personally, I don't think he'd be interested in those seats. I think he could have a great career outside of Formula One. He's had a very long career, won races, been on podiums, all that. And it's a shame it's kind of ended this way, because this will sour the way
gutted.
that Checo's been perceived. Yeah, as a Checo fan, that must be quite...
I'm gutted.
So many... I kind of want him to get dropped mid-season because A, it will give him a chance of getting a seat elsewhere if he wants it, and B, it just ends this kind of like, it's just kicking the can down the road, because it's been 3 and a bit seasons now. Like, if it hasn't changed already, I've got no logic. There's no rationality I can look at to be like, oh, he's going to turn it around all of a sudden. It's just vibes. Like, I've got nothing to go off.
Yeah, and yeah, when see, as a Perez fan, I've wanted it to be over for a long time. What I found is when you look across the pond, the Americas Perez fans were happy with him getting that new contract. They wanted him to stick it out, and they enjoy him being at Red Bull, and they're still happy then to buy the Red Bull merch, to buy the Perez stuff, to buy the 11s. I've got Checo Perez socks now. Very proud owner. Which I got as a gift in Miami from a listener. They're now cherished. I don't know whether to hang them up or wear them. But while he's there, kind of getting okay results, selling merch, but they've obviously reached a critical tip-over point now, where they apparently, the story is, and I don't know where it's come from, so apologies for not quoting the source, but they wouldn't sign the extension unless he agreed to these performance clauses. Have you heard about this?
Right, okay.
Where basically I've
heard about these clauses, yeah.
He's got to be within 100 points of Verstappen by Spa, or they have an option to then cancel that contract. And that's a pretty smart one, because at the time the contract was signed, he was never going to close the gap to Verstappen. It wasn't happening. So they essentially put in a clause that guaranteed they would be able to get rid of him mid-season if they chose to.
Yeah, plus I think there's an and/or if he's lower than P5 in the Drivers' Championship, and I think he's only like 6 points behind Oscar, but then he's only 8 points ahead of Lewis in P8. So,
oh my goodness.
You look at Mercedes' trajectory, he's got George and Lewis right behind him. Like, it's P8 is... If I had to put money on where Checo will be by that mid-season break, he will be P8, and he will be way more than... He's 137 points behind Max Verstappen right now. He will be more than that behind Max by that point. So,
clause activated.
That's the thing. How much... But then this comes into the whole, Red Bull, GmbH, and you've got the Uvidges, you've got the Austrian side. They're selling a lot of merchandise. They're selling a lot of caps. They're selling a lot of energy drinks in Mexico. It's a balance. We just don't know. We're not privy to who's fighting. Horner's got the Uvidge side seemingly on his corner, and then Max and Jos and his side, and Helmut is all Oliver Mitzlaff. That's that side. it's complicated. There's not a clear ownership structure as such, and I think that is playing into this. And then we're talking about Liam Lawson being used as a bit of a pawn because Helmut maybe wants him, but then Christian doesn't. Christian doesn't want Sonoda. Hadjar's like Helmut's a big fan of Hadjar. There's all these different things going on. We just like I would like a fly on the wall would be incredible of like Red Bull racing because especially with what's gone on.
I'm with you. So you're talking about basically you could end up with drivers in there to placate the war between the two sides. So go, okay, well, we'll give you Lawson if, you concede that we need to get rid of Perez or whatever, just to kind of, knit together. It's the baby that saves the marriage, isn't it? So like, okay, look, we'll just give it one more go.
And that's why Max leaving, going to Mercedes and just, Toto he runs that team. He owns a third of that team. And, Jim Ratcliffe and Daimler don't really get too involved. Like they kind of leave him to it. That feels like, from a long-term point of view, the more this goes on and the more you get in this like bickers between Jos and Christian, the more it does actually maybe kind of make sense, especially now Mercedes have caught up on track.
Wow. Now then. So we've managed to go off on nice tangents. The original question was,
sorry,
will Red Bull win more races this year? So, you know me, I like to try and skip past the depressing Perez topics, and there is a question about where Perez might end up next. My guess is that he's going to call time, but obviously with a little bit of money, there's a lot of midfield teams that like money, so that will open up. And I think if he gets sacked mid-season, there's going to be a lot of drivers like Joe and Magnussen that have a little bit of money to go to other teams with are going to be really disappointed because then you've got the Telmex money now dropping back down into the midfield, taking away teams. So it is going to be basically a big, bum fight between the drivers that have backing, and that could be Haas, it could be Sauber, whatever Sauber is at the moment, Stake. It could be Williams, because people argue with me, but both those Williams seats require cash to get into. So you're going to have this, a lot of drivers now looking for those kind of pay-in seats. But the question was, will Red Bull win more races this season? What I find fascinating from Matthew's question is Newey saying that he didn't think it was enough of a change. So basically, I'm betting that Newey was arguing for, let's go in a radical direction that will give us more headroom. And, maybe the rest of Red Bull saying, do you know what, we're onto a pretty good thing here. We've only got to get through the next two seasons. I think it would be mad to throw away this concept. And have they just now stalled out? Because nothing seems to have gone wrong. It's just that the teams who went in different directions perhaps have a bit more headroom now. And I'd be a little bit nervous for Red Bull, not for the championship because he's got such a good head start, but I'd be nervous for race wins. I'd be nervous for slipping out the podium places.
Yeah, perhaps the headroom thing is true. I also think that Red Bull package, since 22, well, not even since 22. I mean, Ferrari were competitive at the start of 22, right? Yeah, but obviously the direction at the very start.
I argue with people
when
about
Red Bulls
this.
weren't breaking down.
Exactly. And if you look at basically, if they finished, they won. So I think it was a little bit of a false dawn from Ferrari.
Yeah. I mean, but it was still somewhat debatable, even without like the DNFs, unlike it was for the majority of last season. I think, you look at the issues riding the curbs, right? I feel like that's been an issue the whole time, but because that car was so much more complete in all these other
just
aspects,
avoid the curbs.
We never saw it.
Yeah, we'll be fine. Just avoid the curbs, we'll be fine.
Exactly. Only now that everyone's caught up are we actually seeing this issue that has always existed in this 22 Red Bull. So I think that, again, back to the original question, I think Max will win races in this Red Bull because it is still an exceptionally quick car and around certain tracks. Spa, you've got to say, like, their straight line speed and their ability to optimize a car around a track like Spa. I feel like that's been the most dominant of the ground effect Red Bull tracks, in my opinion. Spa,
I'm Silverstone really worried me as someone who isn't a Red Bull fan and isn't a Verstappen fan, because I genuinely think the Mercedes and McLaren were faster than Red Bull, yet they ended up finishing second. And I think that's because they did everything perfectly.
Yeah, look, and that's the thing. There's more to F1 than just building the best car. Max and Red Bull made it look easy for as long as they did. and had all this, 11 wins in a row and 9 wins in a row. But it's McLaren are finding out it's actually not that easy to hang at the top, even if you've got the
Even if
best
you've got a
package.
great
You
car.
still have to deliver everything.
But it's that first stint on the mediums where they had no pace. So we can't argue that first stint on the mediums in damp conditions, cool conditions, Red Bull was the third best car on track, on merit, nothing strange happening, nothing funny happening. And he was having a bad stint where he was seeing himself lose ground to the McLarens and get overtaken, didn't he? Got overtaken, completely on pace in the middle of a medium tyre stint. And you go, but it's the way he didn't fall apart in that stint and really held onto the tyre life, kept calm, managed it, waited for an opportunity later in the race, and then they still end up second place on the hard tyre, overtaking the McLaren on the soft tyre. And you go, they're just good. They're just really
He had
good.
no right to be there. No right to be there. Given the pace. And that's the thing. Max has fought in the trenches, right? He's been at Toro Rosso, he's been at Red Bull, always seeing Lewis at the top of that podium and Valtteri Bottas always up there, right? Taking the Constructors' Championships and taking those wins. And, he'd get his odd one, of course, especially, a track like Mexico where the engine advantage for Mercedes didn't kind of pay as much dividends. But now, and so he's done that. He's then done the dominating. So then I think coming back to a position where it is, Max has been there, done that. Like he's done this for years. This is how he didn't just come into F1 in the best car, not by any stretch. He was having to fight for these results against an all-conquering Mercedes. So that experience, him and GP are just like, that's just such a seamless combination.
And you're saying
I think,
all this in a Mercedes
you
top.
compare that to, well, I am, but you compare that to like, I'm not being funny, right? Silverstone, Will Joseph and Lando Norris, their communication versus Lewis and Bono and GP and Max. It's night and day which team isn't used to being up here and winning and actually being in this high pressure to actually deliver, and which two pairs have.
But it was a bit annoying, right? Okay, and I'm putting my, where people accuse me of being biased and a fan of, Hamilton or whatever.
Never.
In that head, this is annoying because with a lack of performance, and actually Sprouse in our Patreon live chat says perhaps the Red Bull was slower than Sainz in that stint towards the end of the first medium stint. So you go, okay,
Was catching.
That's kind of a real performance gap, and it's been over the last few races as well. So it's not come out. It's not like Singapore last year where it was like a freak race. And even then, they were able to come second just by, doing everything brilliantly. And you go, if you wanted real hope for the other teams to come back, what you want is for them to kind of flake a little bit once the pressure starts mounting. And maybe it will over the course of the season. But yeah, I think in two situations where he's had to go wheel to wheel, really, he ended up benefiting out of Austria because he held his nerve, he fought his position. Norris came off, worse off. Whatever the steward said, whatever penalty is been given, Max came off better from Austria as well, and came off better than Norris from Silverstone. So, it's still a juggernaut.
And sometimes, you just got to have a bit of luck going in your favour, right? If Max, when he runs off onto the gravel and doesn't beat you like Checo did, but then goes a little bit further wide, he hits this is the thing, this sport is bloody complicated, right? There's so many, people want to just bottle it and be like, oh, Lando's bottling wins in the quickest car. Hang on. Let's just the totality of the season, right? For one, there's certain cars are better around certain tracks. Also, certain cars are better on a hard tyre than they are on a medium tyre, relative, right?
Yeah.
If you rank cars best from worst on the hard, the medium, and the soft, they would all be a different order. And then you've got temperature as well. Hungary's going to be really hot this weekend. Mercedes have got what?
Have you not seen pictures?
Pole positions.
Have you seen pictures from Hungary?
Well, floods, but it could be warm and rain as well.
Yeah,
so I was there last year in Hungary. I'm glad I'm not this year because that would have been.
Yeah, it looks horrible. It's flooding at the top of the circuit, at the top of the hill. Yeah,
it's mad, but it's like all of these. So then you've got again, a car that's the best car in the hot, a car that's the best car in the like the Williams gets seems to come alive when it's a bit cooler. You've got all of these factors that are just, and then it's like people just like to say, oh, it's just a car. No, but it's these human beings behind the wheel, and it's these fractions. Like if you open up a 5 second gap over the course of a Grand Prix, that's like a tenth a lap. Like it's just nothing. It's these fine margins. It's these human beings pushing themselves, and that's why I love it. Like I love racing, and I love how close it is now, and I'm like so excited going into every Grand Prix, and that's
Yeah.
a feeling that Max fans like it was nothing personal. It was the same when Lewis was winning it, and it was like a done thing when there's actually some kind of we're not sure what's going to happen going into a weekend, like that's gold dust.
I'm actually going to revise. I was trying to be positive during the 22 and 23, and especially with 22, and the kind of maybe Ferrari's kind of in it, and everyone fell for that because people were saying, is Leclerc going to run away with this? Is it going to be boring?
The hope that kills you.
You're comparing it to Hamilton's domination in 19 and 20, and I get that. But the thing that made the Hamilton domination worse was it came off of him in the end winning comfortably in 17 and 18 as well, when it looked like there was going to be a challenge from Vettel's Ferrari.
Yeah.
And they Ferrari'd towards the end of the season like they're Ferrariing now as well. Hamilton's got that to look forward to. And that came off the back of the Mercedes domination. But just in isolation, I do think the 2022, 23, and then beginning of 24, I do think that's the worst period of domination and hopeless feeling of, oh my gosh, this is never going to end. I think that is one of the worst periods of total domination in F1. It's like if Vettel's 2013 car had done it for another season and a half.
You look at 2020, and Lewis could have won 14 in a row if it wasn't for Monza, which was a strategy. Well, they pulled him in when the pit lane was closed. And obviously the 70th anniversary, Silverstone, whatever, and they just seem to kind of bottle their setup essentially. If not for those two Grand Prix, he would have won 14 in a row. So, but I think because of COVID, because of lockdown, because we had different people on the podium, like, I don't know, there was a whole different vibe around F1 in 2020, I felt. Like, even though Lewis was walking it, life was different. And I don't know, it just felt... It felt different.
I have to acknowledge that my Hamilton fandom would have made that less bad because I'm happy every weekend, don't I? Whereas with the Verstappen one, I was like, oh, not again. So I'm looking at the results sheet and I go, oh yeah, I actually don't remember 2020 being quite like that.
Yeah,
Gasly won.
It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah,
Gasly won. Lando got his first podium. You had all these different like stories going on that I think were maybe. I think those other stories felt more prominent because of where the world was at the time, and it was like one of the first sports to come back. So even though Lewis was still dominating, like arguably close to as much as Max has been at his most dominant, I do think it felt different, not just because I'm wearing a Mercedes t-shirt.
Bottas only won.
I know it's hard to claim that while I'm wearing. I do have a Red Bull cap, so I can.
Oh, I know. I've got different caps depending on what we're talking about. So yeah, if you want to talk, we're talking about McLaren next. I've got that. I've got a Haas cap underneath it.
Nice.
I'm ready for NASCAR if we switch onto that, and I've got a Mahindra hat as well in the background. So just whichever one I need at any given moment. Okay, always happy to acknowledge when some fan bias slips through. If you'd have said to me, how many races did Bottas win in 2020? I'd have gone, I don't know, like 5? But it was only 2. So it was only the season opener and then Russia, Sochi.
There you go.
Right, let's move on then. Let's move on to Mercedes. So we've got some questions. Sorry, McLaren. We've got some questions about McLaren here. I didn't think Red Bull was going to take quite so long, but that was fun. I enjoyed that. So...
more the merrier.
You had a weird tweet that I disagreed with about Piastri and where you ranked Piastri. So that's going to come up. But the first question is from Tim Rudd. Says, Zach Brown is making an aggressive, sometimes a bit more than aggressive, approach towards Christian Horner and Red Bull. Does the panel think that this will have a beneficial potential effect for McLaren? This is really interesting because it is really, really clear that Zach Brown hates Red Bull. I would put it as far as that. I think he has got a seething anger towards Red Bull. And the team principal, help me, Seidel? No.
Andrea Stella.
Stella. Stella obviously hates Red Bull. It seems pretty apparent that management has a deep kind of sport. I'm sure it's only sporting, but that sporting rivalry and aggression towards Red Bull has been open for everyone to see. And a clip I recently saw on TikTok, you're too young for this, Tommo, but it was Alex Ferguson winding up Kevin Keegan in the championship showdown between Manchester United and Newcastle, and he was basically saying the other teams only fight when they play United. They don't fight when they play the likes of just Newcastle. And Kevin Keegan went absolutely nuts, going, I'd love it if we beat them. And
classic clip. And
you kind of go, well, Horner is always very measured at the camera and to the media, whereas McLaren are being really kind of open. And that rant about, Verstappen not being clamped down on by Stella was, it was really candid. And we're sort of not used to that level of candidness that McLaren are showing us. So I don't know, will it help?
Well, I guess it depends on whether you think this is them, like how honest you think this all is. Is this as an attempt to almost look at, Horner versus Wolff in 21 and how, polarizing that got? And I think at times, they both got under each other's skin, and that was such an intense title battle. We're nowhere near that. And it feels like, with these words coming out of Zach and Andrea's mouths, Christian he's not rising to it. Because I don't think there's no pressure, there's no real need for Christian to rise to it. But is this kind of tactical and almost like working towards 25 to a position where it does become, actually close for a title fight and actually close? And with all these, there was an article about Red Bull, some kind of calling vein on the McLaren that they're not too happy about. And obviously Zach Brown's been... I mean, him and Christian have clashed before as well. This is not the first time by any stretch. So, yeah, I do wonder how much is they're just kind of playing a game here. Because Zach Brown, I mean, he's not Tadej Pourchaire's. Tadej Pourchaire's not his biggest fan right now either. After the whole IndyCar thing, he might come across as kind of all warm, huggy teddy bear, but inside there's he's a tough cookie.
I'm not seeing the teddy bear side. I'm not seeing that.
He's pretty teddy bearish generally, isn't he? I think he is. I think he's pretty teddy
interesting how you can get different conclusions from the same thing. No, I see. I think it's real. I think it's genuine. I don't think it's trying to get under their skin. I think it's a moral issue. So I feel like they have an objection with how Red Bull go about things. And there was an article, again, cannot source it, I'm so sorry, that said McLaren say they don't need to be nasty to win the title or to be in a title fight. But it was basically calling Red Bull all this stuff by saying what they wouldn't be. So it's like, we could fight for the title without being evil and horrible and cheats, not naming anything. But you know what I mean? And it was just, I genuinely think it's real. And I don't think they're trying to get under his skin. And if you look at that Wolff-Horner battle in 21, Horner won it. Horner played the officials. They played the referees between him and Wheatley, and they did it all throughout the season. They have worked hard to kind of get the rules changed in favor of them and in favor of Verstappen. His style of racing became completely legitimized, and instead of being punished like Stella what was said it should have been, it actually got woven into the fabric of the sport, and they changed the rules around that. And that is down to Horner and the management. So I think if you are going to go toe to toe in psychological warfare against Horner, I think that's a big challenge.
I just wonder, what is all of these words from Andrea Stella and Zach Brown, they're putting them out into the world through the media out of choice. They don't have to say these things. They can choose, they can believe these things and not say them, or they can say these things, put them out to the world. And I just wonder, I guess I'm skeptical because I'm like, well, what is the value to putting that stuff out, if not to try and get under their skin, especially with obviously the Christian Horner mess earlier this year, and Zach Brown was very prepared to kind of use that as an opportunity to dig at Christian Horner. I think that, this is a game. Motorsport's a tough word. Like you say, you think less than me that Zach Brown's a bit of a teddy bear. He's cutthroat. He knows what he's doing.
I think he's cutthroat.
But also, is this what he? And I think the evidence proves that he is cutthroat. You're right. But is this what it takes to win? And again, I'm not saying I disagree with it at all. Actually, this is all part of the soap opera of what it is, and I'll take it for what it is. But what I am saying is that, I do think they're doing it for a reason, and I do think there is.
You think it's tactical?
Yeah, of course. I think
passion.
definitely.
I think it's passion.
Definitely.
I think it's a crime of passion. as the French would call
Because
it.
the thing is though, like throughout the history of the sport, right, as there's always been, especially when things get close and there's talk about double diffusers, legality, all this kind of stuff. This always comes up. This always bubbles to the point, and I think that I would also say, there was a lot of to and fro, and I agree with a lot of what you said about 21 and how Max did. Max played to the whistle, and that's all you can ask from a driver. And I don't blame Max at all. And he went over the line and wasn't punished with it at times, and it changed the way you can push people off track as long as you don't even need to leave them a car's width as long you're headed at the apex. I don't think that's what racing should be, but that's what that's what we've got from it. However, like at the time, I don't really remember anyone outside of Toto Wolff engaging and speaking up about that too much.
No one did. Yeah, no one did.
So, like, if it was such a big issue, why weren't? And again, look, because I just think they're just all playing the game.
I'll tell you why.
If McLaren were at the back now, I don't think Stella and Zach would be talking the way they are if they were still, fighting for P20.
Because it had been 2014, 2015, 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20 of Mercedes. That's why people didn't say anything, because everybody wanted a changing of the guard, the natural changing of the guard. Your description of saying play to the whistle, why didn't I think of that? So like in football, you do whatever you want to do, and you keep running, and you go to ground, and you do whatever until the referee tells you not to. Until the referee blows the whistle, you just keep playing. And I think that explains the point I've been trying to get across with Verstappen, which is, why wouldn't you? If you're able to scythe people down and the ref says play on, then you just play on, don't you? It's just
Thierry Henry handball against Ireland, right?
My
Kept it in.
But that's like, too soon. That was 20 years ago.
but like he got away with it, and that sport, you get away with things, and there are so many tiny, whether it's a ball going out for a throw and maybe just going out or maybe not going out, or slightly like the butterfly effect is you can't even fathom how it can change the course of history yet.
Yeah, you got to play the referee. You got to play the referee as well. So like Alonso with his wiggling the steering wheel, like, I had to brake so much, and I nearly died in the pit lane. and Alonso's great at doing that kind of stuff. But I remember being pulled aside as like I think a 12-year-old, and I would try and skip through challenges, and the manager's going, "You just got to go to ground, hold your knee," and you do, and the referee goes, "Oh, he hurt that poor kid." Free kick, and it works. So playing the officials, playing the referee, I mean, it is part of sport everywhere. So I just want to be clear. I'm not blaming Verstappen for any of that, and I'm so glad. Play to the whistle. I'm going to delete this out.
You can have that one,
and I'm going to pretend I said it. I'll edit in me saying it. Okay, so time to hold you to account. All right. So David V in our Patreon chat says Peter Windsor says Piastri as a short corner driver. No, not heard that phrase before. Like Lewis and Max, will ultimately be quicker than Lando, who is a more traditional techniqued driver. Thoughts? Do you even believe that the short corner thesis, and would any driver benefit from a week with Rob Wilson? So I don't know who Rob Wilson is. Apologies. I think you're in the live chat now. You can clarify that for me. But you placed Piastri as the fourth best performing driver of the season. I wouldn't have him anywhere near that. Is it because you think he's a short corner driver? I don't really
know. I didn't give Peter Windsor that one, to be honest. No, you know what? I think that when I'm rating drivers, right, and part of my mid-season report, looking at all the drivers, how they've performed, how well I think they've done with their opportunity in F1 this year, I think you have to take into account, for me, the fact that he's only had 30. This is his 32 races in Formula One. For one thing, because obviously he's not as engrossed in the team as his teammate. He's not as engrossed in his team as Carlos is at Ferrari, Charles is at Ferrari, Lewis is at Mercedes, George is at Mercedes, etc., etc. And then you look at Oscar, and I'm like, he's been so unlucky so often. Be that with safety car timings, be that with decisions by, like in Miami, be that, bad decisions by
You're going to say Austria, aren't you, where he was off track and everyone said, well, that shouldn't matter because we like Oscar.
Right, hang on. No. I think we disagree massively on this one.
Okay, so, go on then. Austria.
So, for example, so that one, for example, if you're going to add gravel, make it do its job. The point surely is that who wants a sport where every single corner we need to have track limits? Surely the ideal,
I'd
and I'm
want
not
that.
saying that this should happen, right? Every single corner should self-regulate, right? If you go off,
I don't agree.
you don't need to have your lap deleted because you're going to lose time. If Oscar dipped a wheel in the gravel, he would have lost time. It was literally this tiny margin this
Tiny
tiny
margin
window.
between what? Between what and
This
what? Between what?
tiny window
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
it's literally an oversight. It is literally an oversight because the point of giving that much width, like 1.8 meters, I think they gave between the edge of the line
Yeah, that's what they went
and
for.
the edge. And he got in this tiny window where he didn't drop his wheel, but was technically outside of track limits. That is I think that's what he meant by it's embarrassing because it's literally an oversight that if they just locked off another 10 centimeters off that, he would have dipped his wheel, he would have lost time. Charles Leclerc dipped his wheel in qualifying, lost time there, ended up messing up the final sector entirely. Oscar would have completely messed up his lap. Like it was such a silly oversight, and it annoyed me, and I thought he got unlucky.
I can't remember how much we argued about this at the time because wasn't it a sprint weekend? It was a sprint weekend, so a lot of stuff had happened. I think we might not really have got. So my overriding argument to that is I don't actually really like natural barriers. I would love just an electronic version that just punished you somehow for going over track limits. And I think, the line is the limit, and they said beforehand the line is the limit. If he fooled himself into thinking, oh, there's a natural barrier, I can use as much of that as I like without punishment, then he misinterpreted the rules and got it wrong. What other call could the stewards make except it's out of track limits? You can't go, we said beforehand it will be the line. We've got this natural barrier as well, and we see that you went over the line, but actually we're just going to let you off. That would be the wrong decision.
He went outside the line. I agree with that. The point is that shouldn't, like, when Charles Leclerc went wide there and dipped his wheels, like, there's no point even what's the point in deleting the lap time? Like, as far as I'm concerned, if you're going to dip wheels in the gravel on that corner around a track like Austria, if you can dip wheels in the gravel, right, and then carry on and still set pole, you deserve it.
Or you could argue if you dip a wheel in the gravel and set pole, then it's not much of a deterrent anyway, and you need something like track limits.
But that's the thing, that wouldn't happen. Because that's not like, that would only happen if everyone else completely messes up their lap, and then they've messed up their laps. Like I just think that all what I'm annoyed about is the fact that was able to happen because yes, his lap got deleted. Yes, he went outside of track limits, but it's literally an oversight. It's clearly to me an oversight, and that's why it's stupid.
This is so good because I thought you were only going to be wrong about where you placed Piastri. I didn't realize you were going to be wrong about the track limits thing. Wow, this is brilliant. You're welcome anytime. But I would actually be fine if you said, okay, going forward, let's clarify this now. But I still think it was the right call in the moment because you'd already set the track limits line.
If you already set the track limits, fine. But I disagree with the way the track was. Like, the track should have been designed differently. That's what I'm annoyed about. Because if it was designed slightly differently, you wouldn't have this issue because he would have either dipped a wheel and lost time, or he wouldn't have extended over track limits. So simple as.
So I see what you're saying about the natural barriers, and a lot of people, want these natural barriers. And let me do a middle-aged man gatekeeping. But back in the 90s, when every corner were a gravel trap, it actually was genuinely disappointing because, a driver would have a little off, and like your favorite driver would have a little off from midfield, and you go, oh. And there was so little action back then as well. If one of the top guys went off in a gravel trap and just got beached there, you're like, oh, now we don't have PK for the rest of the race. I like having runoff. I like the fact that they can get back in. I just think, run off track limits. And, if you run over a certain amount of times, you lose a bit of power, or you've got to give back a certain amount of lap delta. It's so easy. So easy to do.
I think at Austria, run off at turn 3, fine. Turn 1 as well. Like, I'm happy with a run off there. I just think if you're going to put gravel there, do it properly, and they didn't do it properly, because there shouldn't be this tiny fractional margin where you can just about get outside the track limits but also not lose time and dip your wheel. That there's no reason for that to exist. That was an oversight. That is what I'm annoyed about.
That chatter agreeing with you to a bit. Ineffective natural deterrents are very annoying from a sporting perspective. And actually, Matt, I'll give Matt credit here. He's had one of the best ideas, which is have like the motorway bumps, so the drivers at least really get an audible indication of like, oh, you're getting really close now to going off track limits. And I think that would actually, that would probably solve quite a bit of it, because drivers, every time they went out there, they go up. Or have ramped curbs. So the further you go, like banking. so the further you go up, the more disadvantaged you are by kind of losing traction from going up a curb. Okay, but you haven't answered the question, you coward. Is Lando, does Piastri have ultimately more chance of being quicker than Lando Norris?
Well, look at how close Oscar is to Lando after 30 odd races in that car versus Lando's now in his, how many seasons has Lando done now? Was 2018 was his first? Or 19? 19 was his first, wasn't it? It's been a lot. So yeah, I think Piastri absolutely could, and certainly the strength he does have over Lando, and also having Tom Stallard as his race engineer. I think, I think from that point of view, he's in a stronger position than Lando. One lap pace, he's pretty much there, and tire management, he's a bit behind. But I think that will come with time. That typically comes with time. I think one lap pace is something that a lot of drivers can come into the sport and immediately have, but managing the race takes long. And he's so measured, he's so calm, he's so clinical on the radio. I absolutely think he could be the driver that actually fights for a championship in 25 over Norris. Yeah, I do. I think Lando needs to work on those weaknesses that we saw in Silverstone, both in himself, the way he communicates, and with his race, with Will Joseph as well.
I got on the Piastri hype train early. So last year, I was really all over it. And didn't he win a sprint race last season? Was that last season?
He did. He won Qatar.
Yeah. Right. So, nice encyclopedic knowledge there. I don't have that. And I got on that hype train early until it became really apparent that he wasn't managing the tyres well in the higher wear, circuits where that was more of an issue. And now I say, you can predict, if we know there's not going to be an issue with tyre wear, he's going to be a little bit closer. If not, he's going to struggle a little bit more. And he looked really fast in Silverstone, because those tyre stints were sort of cut short. Like they were kind of weirdly stunted by the changes in rain, which might have kind of hit. And I just feel like it's too big a weakness. Like, can someone show me the driver that came into F1 quick on a hard, fresh tyre with great one lap pace, but not good tyre management, and then over the seasons got better at that, rescued that situation? Because, I'm looking at Russell as another example of that. He's been in F1 a long time, and it feels like it's still the same balance of performance between those two skill sets. So that's where I worry for Piastri.
It's going to be really interesting this weekend, because last year in Hungary was a race where he really struggled relative to Lando on the tyres. He was ahead of Lando. He got the jump on him at the start, and McLaren essentially kind of swapped them round by giving Lando the undercut. And Oscar maybe got a bit of damage from his, he got kind of pushed wide, just went off with fighting with Checo, and possibly picked up a bit of damage there. But Hungary last year was a prime example of Oscar really struggling race pace relative to Lando. But I think this season, that gap has been significantly closed up. Like looking at the gaps that I've seen, I've not got like race gap at the end, time's up. But from what I've consumed, I feel like the bulk of this season, it has felt like, Oscar can nip Lando in quali, and then in the races he can keep up. And I think I agree. I think Russell's definitely got a race pace deficit to Lewis, and I think again that's a product of experience. The drivers that can really pull those stints out lap after lap, your Verstappens, your Hamiltons, your Alonsos, these guys get it because they know how to masseuse these tires over stints. And I think Oscar's catching him at a rate of knots. I do.
That's what they say in Chelmsford, by the way. It's not weird. They say, let's go and get masseused. That's what they say. At the moment, the gap is 124 points for Piastri versus Norris's 171. So you can point to Piastri's bad luck taking some points away, but Norris has definitely had some missed opportunities, getting taken out by Verstappen being one of them. People argue that if he'd have had a slightly different tyre at Silverstone, he would have, been 2 places higher and apparently won by 30 seconds. I don't quite agree with that, but they've both had their fair share of dropped points. So is there 12 races left? I'd be willing to bet that Norris finishes 90 points ahead of Piastri by the end of the season.
I reckon, I would say the way things are going, I would say the gap will be smaller than it is now by the end of the season.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I think that's a big call. So the gap is currently, I'm so bad at maths, 124, 171, 47 point gap. You think it's going to be smaller than that? I think it's going to be closer to 90. All right, cool.
Yeah.
All right.
So we'll revisit this.
Let's do it. Okay. Well, I'm torn now for a final topic. There was an email here from Leo saying why was what Verstappen did to Lando Norris bad, but what Sainz did to Verstappen the year before was okay. But I think I want to answer that quickly because I've had a few, and I never really got the chance to answer that on the show at the time. We're talking about turn 3 up at Austria, and I think what people are missing is you have to leave a car's width on the outside if you're coming back or if a car exists there. The difference between those two incidents is Lando Norris stayed on track, 4 wheels on the track, whereas the previous year, 23, Verstappen chose to take the curb and then Sainz took the leftover space. So I've seen that. What about Sainz versus Verstappen 23 come up a lot. So I just wanted to spit that answer out. But I think we'll end on the qualifying question from Jelly. Dear Missed Apex crew, that's very formal. Sometimes Q1 is a mess because too many cars want to qualify as late as possible. A quick and easy solution would be to have quali in IndyCar style. Not all cars enter together, but 2 groups of 10 cars have qualifying separately. From both groups, the top 5 enter into a regular Q3. Still 3 sessions, still 3 times the tension, but the mess is gone. I think Formula E had a similar setup to this as well, where they had 2 groups and then like a super final. This would allow for additional teams without an even bigger mess. I haven't heard this being discussed. What do you think? So firstly, is there a problem with F1 qualifying to fix in the first place?
I think F2 do that in Monaco as well, don't they? I feel like they.
Is that how they avoid it?
Yeah, I think they split the grid down the middle because there's no way you could F2 qualifying in Monaco would be chaos if you didn't do that. So yeah, look, I think there's definitely a argument that the current system, you get a lot of traffic. There's a lot of potential aeroplane crashes that we've fortunately not had, but been very close to having.
Especially like Saudi, those kind of tracks, yeah.
Zandvoort as well. I remember there was one with Vettel, I think with Mick Schumacher, and it was almost horrific. So yeah, I would. There's not the same. Obviously, Q3 I think's got a really nice feel to it. You've only got 10 cars out on track, so there's usually plenty of room. Usually, unless you're in Monza, of course. And yeah, well, again, like with Monza, you get the tow as well, which is a factor, and the more cars you have on track, but also dirty air. So these things kind of cancel each other out. I think I don't hate that system. I think, does it solve it? People don't like change for the sake of change. Well, people don't like change anyway. I don't mind that, actually, to be honest, Spanners. I'm actually a bit more. I mean, look, I've long been a proponent of one shot for Monaco, at least. One shot qualifying, I think, would be a lot more interesting around there. And then also one shot qualifying means that you don't have traffic, you don't have slipstream, you don't have dirty air. It's kind of a much more, every person for themselves. Obviously, you get a bit of track evolution, but maybe you could have,
that's what kills it for me. That's what kills it for me is look at Track Evo at the moment, where a car that is the last one to go over the line suddenly has a big advantage. You're basically baking that in. So you almost know that the cars going out later have an advantage. So then you have to go, well, how do you earn the choice to go later? So you have kind of a pre-qualifying or the practice or championship order.
maybe have a normal Q1, and then that incentivizes, the higher you finish, the later you go out in that final one-shot session. So it incentivizes you to push more in that Q1 session than just have a Q1 and a Q2. But yeah, splitting that first session, maybe have like one driver from each team in each session. So you've got one
Yeah,
one team
yeah,
represented in each one. That could be fun.
yeah. My instinct is it isn't really broken at the moment. It's a little bit crowded. I think the chaos adds a little bit of a tactical element into it. So everyone's got the same issue. Everyone's got the same problem to avoid. Yeah. And teams are taking fundamentally different approaches to it. So do you go for like the optimal being the last car over the line, or do you understand the chaos is going to come in and get out there early? So I don't sort of mind. It's a bit like, well, just, tough luck and get on with it. But what's the purpose of qualifying? Is it that the fastest cars on merit gain higher grid positions, or do we want a system that messes it up and, gives us an interesting grid? So that isn't a legitimate sporting question, because for decades and decades and decades, it's we want to gift the higher positions to the cars that do better in qualifying.
Yeah, I mean, there's not many sports that give an advantage to the best at the start. Imagine Usain Bolt only having to run 90 meters instead of 100. So I guess maybe there's an argument to, I'm not sure. I agree, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't think it's fundamentally broken the way it is. Again, I do think for certain, like, I think Monaco should have its own. If you're going to have a track like that on the F1 calendar, it should have its own. I don't think there's anything wrong with having its own way. Well, maybe they just all have Rotax carts going around Monaco. That'd be good fun.
Oh, do you know what? No. Right. So you have to have your equivalent team from like the 70s. You have to go and get a retro car from the museum. And so it's an incentive, because whatever car you're running in 2024, in 2054, you're going to have to run that car again. So you could do that.
Williams would cook. They would just, oh my gosh, banking on past success.
When you get to the active suspension Williams, you'd be quids in, wouldn't you?
What would Gene has to? He'd just have a CNC machine going around with wheels attached.
You just pick the equivalent. So you kind of go, well, Tyrrell were kind of the Haas of that time, so you have that. So I'm reluctant to change any format with Monaco in mind. Like Monaco, that's its own problem. I'm not pulling the old card, but in the 80s, 90s, people barely cared about qualifying. Honestly, it was not the thing it wasn't the spectacle it is today. And in fact, qualifying used to be so dull, because you'd get an hour to qualify, but nobody wanted to go out and lay down rubber for the benefit of everyone else. So you'd be watching this qualifying session, and cars would not come out until the last 5 minutes. I'm not exaggerating. You'd have 55 minutes of empty track. So when this format came in, it was amazing. It's like, oh wow, qualifying's like a real exciting thing, and I think they've kind of nailed it, to be honest.
There's a magic to qualifying. It gives drivers as well an opportunity to shine. When you've got a Haas getting into. Remember last year in Hungary, Joe P5, Bottas P7 in the Alfa Romeo Sauber. Like it gives, I think, drivers, and Lewis obviously put it on pole by 0.003 of a second. Like that was such a being there. Like that was so well received. Like the crowd went mad. I was surprised, because you're not actually that far from Spielberg, Austria, and I've been there, and it was just all Max fans. Go to Hungary, and it was a real like diverse range, and it went down so well. There's definitely a magic to qualifying, and even though does it like when you start first or second, like the butterfly effect of that, we can never know how that's going to change things. But like, there's definitely something about it that has its own ceremony, its own excitement. That is one of the most exciting parts of the weekend.
Really,
if anything, it's meant to be at Monaco, but the amount of times people smash it into the barriers in Monaco and then ruin everyone else's laps, that actually kind of and that's why I'd like one shot for Monaco, because then you don't have that problem.
I'm actually starting to, especially with the sprints coming in, I'm starting to deprioritize Saturdays because it's so quickly can be turned around on a Sunday. So I think I said this on the Ringer, that when it was Russell P1, Hamilton P2 on the Saturday of Silverstone, not a moment in my mind did I think, oh, that gives Russell a chance to win. Because I look at race pace, it's Silverstone, and he's won it, 9 times now. So instantly I just went, oh, brilliant. Hamilton is P2. That's high enough up. He's going to win. He's going to at least, beat Russell. I did not think Russell would be able to hold that advantage. So in a way, because we kind of understand the characteristics of these cars, how they interact with the tyres, all those different factors you were mentioning early on, and the fact that certain drivers react to certain conditions differently, you can look at a qualifying result and be kind of, yeah, great. Like, it's brilliant that Leclerc nicked that pole, but we know that he's not converting pole positions. So it's the tension has been degraded for me because of that.
It's a nice comparison between teammates as well, though, right? Because I think, they always say, the teammate's the only person with the same car. Well, unless you're Williams, because Sargent doesn't get the upgrades at the same rate Albon does. But either way, like, it's another way in which we can try and compare these drivers in such a nuanced, complicated sport where you're never going to have 100% of the information in front of you. And we as fans, like, we're just trying to understand what's going on. I think qualifying's a nice way of at least being able to, all right, yeah, Lewis does have something on George in race pace, but in qualifying pace, George is exceptional, and no one's ever done this to Lewis, like, in terms of the consistency in which George is being able to out-qualify, not by a huge amount, but the head-to-head speaks for itself. That doesn't tell the full story, of course. Like, if you average half a tenth over a teammate and you 18-0 them versus half a second and 18-0 them, very different things. But the fact that George can go into a team that Lewis has been so established at for so long and actually not only hold his own, but just get that little bit extra on a Saturday out. Yes, it doesn't convert to points on a Sunday, but it's something.
I'm doing that thing I was describing at the beginning of the show where I had that same opinion as you, that Russell's probably got the edge in qualifying. And I think out and out, Hamilton has never really leaned on being the best qualifier. That's not the way he gets points. That's not what he's looking at. But the second you said it, I found a reason to disagree with you. I was like, okay, so I'm not just picking a fight because I initially agreed with you until you spoke, and then I disagreed.
Until you heard it out of my mouth and you're like, this guy's chatting nonsense.
Wow, you can make any opinion sound wrong. Well done. This is great. So the slight disagreement would be it's so close, like the margin, when they both nail the lap. I do think Hamilton tends to run a click higher downforce, just in general between the two. I think that seems to be a setup difference between them that they tend to have. So perhaps Hamilton loses a little bit of straight line speed. And in fact, the side-by-side at Monaco, they do the car overlaps, and you could actually see Russell really catching on the Wellington straight, for example, and then down the Hangar straight as well. So I think there's a slight caveat in my mind because it's so close. I don't think they're running the same setups. It's my only little counter.
Yeah. And look, again, I think Lewis would be very prepared to forego, all right, George looks like he's dominating me in qualifying, if it means that Lewis is actually going to win more races, score more points.
Because he did that to Rosberg in 2015.
Exactly that. Like, it's information, but also it still has caveats. Like, it's always going to have caveats. And that's why we will always debate about these things, because there's always going to be good points like you just made. And then I'm just like, well, yeah, maybe actually that is the case. Maybe Lewis is as fast as George over the lap. Maybe they're all so good and they're all so close that we should just enjoy it and take it all in.
Couple of points there to finish with from our Patreon live chat. David says, makes my point for me, really. Unfortunately, Joe lost 11 places at the start last year at Hungary. So, a lot of that Saturday, like, oh, that's so brilliant, that's so exciting. A lot of it gets just so instantly taken away. And then Skraus says, actually, maybe quality's important because as fans, it's the only time we get to see the cars at full tilt, which I think is a really excellent point as well. Thank you so much for joining me for opening the listener mailbag with me, Tommo. If you don't already follow Tommo and his content, he's one of the most consistent on the button streamers in YouTube. Like, as soon as a news story hits, you're like, yep, I'm on it. Let's get involved with that community. So go and follow Tommo at Tommo F1, at Twommo F1 with a W.
Oh, that's the Twitter Tommo.
Yeah, that's the Twitter. What about the YouTube? Have you also made that mistake with the W?
No, YouTube is just Tommo. Also, Tommo's Race Chinwag is on all good audio platforms as well. That's my live stream that I cut up and chuck on the podcast world, trying to emulate my favorite podcaster Spanners.
You can but try. You can but try. But no, definitely go and check out Tommo. If nothing else, just for being excellent on Twitter. But most importantly, your dog, Milton.
I forgot. You did that on
No, I
purpose, didn't
didn't.
you?
Minton, your dog Minton has an Instagram page which everyone needs to follow. How do we get there?
At Minton the Miniature. And to end, actually, do you want to know how Minton got his name? Because it's actually a joke.
Oh, is it?
Yes. So I came home one day and my dog Minton had eaten all my shuttlecocks. Bad Minton.
No, that you can't. You can end your stream like that. You're going to end my stream like that. That is unbelievable. That's why you should follow me at Spanners Ready, because I'm usually the best one. And also follow the show at Missed Apex F1. If you want to support us on Patreon, we'd really, really appreciate that. That's what keeps us afloat. Patreon.com/Missed Apex for an ad-free feed. Join us in our Discord and get our Patreon-only content. Go and follow Tommo. Follow me. Catch us on a Sunday for our race review. We do try and get it ready for your Monday morning commute, and I think this will be no different unless we get massive red flag delays. But until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast.